Hello everyone, how are we doing today? Over the past couple of weeks, we discussed risk mitigation. And during those discussions, we highlighted some of the strategies for for treating risk. You know, I mean, from the very background, from the very foundation of risk management, the first step we identify our risk. We analyze our risk, we evaluate, and then treat the risk. We see risk treatment as, just assume somebody had gone to the doctor over a particular ailment or so, and the doctor recommends some tests. So when the test results are out, the doctor using those then prescribe some modalities for treatment or some drugs. That's what risk treatment is about. However, organizations, could use a variety of strategy to respond to this risk. Though highlighted in our previous videos, we are taking a deep dive into risk response strategies. And here we provide a comprehensive framework for identifying, like we talked about it before, assessing and managing organizational risk effectively. So it's a continuation of our previous videos. Again, I am yours, Dr. Dennis Edogun, your risk smart buddy. Let's go. Let's take a deep dive at risk response strategy. There are 7 core response strategies. These 7 core response strategies will be broken into two parts. The first part will look at responses to negative risk, which we call stress. However, the flip side of the negative risks are also opportunities. So risk must never be seen as always negative. So let's look at the strategy for responding to negative risks in this video. In our next video, we'll look at strategies for responding to positive risk. Because of length, I broke down the lesson into 3 parts. This is part number 1. Now, the first is risk avoidance. Sometimes you look at the scenario, you look at the resources you have, you look at everything, and you just decide to say, well, we're avoiding this, we're not going to take part of it. To do that, we eliminate all activities and conditions that give rise to the risk. This can be used when risks are catastrophic or highly regulated. There are certain risks you say, oh no, it's not worth taking because the impact on your business or on your life as an individual is huge. So you avoid completely. Now, the next strategy is risk acceptance. Okay, so you look around and say, okay, it's risk. There's nothing we can run away from this particular one. We need to accept it. So risk acceptance is acknowledging the risk and choosing to bear its potential consequences. Don't forget, risk is a product of consequences and frequency or probability. So we acknowledge the risk and choose to bear its potential consequences. This is appropriate for minor risk where or when the benefits outweighs the cost. So we just say, okay, it is what it is. We'll live with it. The next strategy is risk reduction. oftentimes called risk mitigation, which was basically the subject for our previous videos. In risk reduction, we take steps to reduce the probability or or the impact of the event. This is ideal for manageable risk with reasonable control options. The next strategy is risk transfer. When the risk is unavoidable and the way to treat it in order to still participate in the risk is to share. And risk transfer is shifting the burden of risk to another third party. Insurance outsourcing, for instance. For instance, in Canada, is engaged the law to drive vehicles without licenses. So, when you have a license on your vehicle, the next stage is that you must also have an insurance. It's engaged the law to drive without a vehicle insurance also. So now, insurance plays a key role here because you are transferring the burden of loss to the insurance company in exchange for the premium that you pay monthly or yearly as the case may be. So for as long as your premiums are paid and all terms and conditions are obeyed, if your vehicle is stolen or you are involved in an accident, for instance, the insurance bears the responsibility for replacement of your vehicle based on the terms and conditions of the policy. This is effective for financial and specialized risk and insurance, home, the variety of ways this can be used to transfer risk. Now, the positive risk also have different methodology for treatment. We can exploit, we can enhance, we can share the opportunity so that more people can benefit. We're going to take a deep dive at each and every one of these uh, strategy shortly. But for now, a little definition will help. To exploit, we take actions to ensure the opportunity definitely happens. We can fast track a project to capture market share. That would be an example. Enhance, we can increase the likelihood or impact of the opportunity. For instance, invest in extra resources to improve the outcomes of the risk. Share, we can allocate ownership to a third party who is best positioned to maximize the opportunity, such as forming a joint venture in businesses. Additionally, contingency planning and escalation are also different ways different companies deal with risk. For instance, when you use risk avoidance, you must also bear in mind that as you avoid, you are also losing the flip side, which is opportunities. Similarly, when you choose to accept a particular risk, there has to be a contingency plan such that if the risk event eventually show up, that there's a plan of action. So contingency planning involves developing response plans for inevitable risk. And you can use this when when risks cannot be avoided. So you can avoid a particular risk or set of risks, you accept them. When you accept, there has to be a plan in place. The other strategy is escalation. Escalation involves moving risk decisions up the organizational ladder because sometimes the a particular decision or a particular risk could also have blurring boundaries across different functions or departments. So escalation will help to move it forward, upward, so that everybody within the organization is on the known of what could go wrong. So there are, you know, selecting a particular strategy must be taken, that decision must be taken critically. Here are some factors you must consider when selecting an appropriate risk response strategy. So you consider risk tolerance and appetite of your organization. You consider the organizational capabilities. You consider the cost benefits of either options. Then you look at the regulatory requirements because most organizations are heavily regulated in Canada and other parts of the world. Then you also take into account the expectations of your stakeholders. And here I provide a best practice. We say most effective risk management programs use a combination of strategies tailored to their specific risk profile and business objectives. This is very important because there is no one size fit all in all cases. What's suitable for company A may be unsuitable for company B. So you take a holistic view of everything, then choose one or two of the strategies depending on the situation. Now, we are taking a little deeper dive into the strategy we discussed before for the negative risk at this time. I would say risk avoidance is eliminating specific activities or conditions that could trigger risk by choosing to not to engage with the risk at all. We just say we're not doing it, that's okay. But like I said before, if we avoid a particular risk, we might also be losing out on the flip side of the risk, which might present some opportunities. So, when to use? When the risk is catastrophic, could lead to bankruptcy or permanent closure of your business, of course, you can avoid that. In highly regulated industries where compliance failures have exponential consequences, for instance, there are industries in Canada that are so heavily regulated. So, participation in the industry will require a robust risk management plan or system. When potential benefits don't outweigh possible losses, we can just avoid it. Here is a typical example. A company avoiding business with sanctioned entities to prevent devastating legal penalties, financial losses, and reputational damage. You know, today the world is interconnected. To do business means you are not in your silo, you are engaging with other people and other organizations. So absolute care must be taken to ensure you have carried out a proper due diligence to identify the entity you want to be associated with. So, irrespective of the premises, if the entity has questionable character, it's best you avoid doing taking the risk of doing business with such an entity. Risk acceptance. By definition, we say accepting risk means acknowledging a risk and choosing no immediate action, either because its impact is minor or the cost of mitigation exceeds the potential benefits of addressing that particular risk event. And this can be used when the risk has a low probability and minimal impact. Don't forget, we said there are quantitative methodology for calculating or assigning numbers to risk. So if and is a sum of probability and impact. So if the probability and impact are low enough, then we can accept the risk. But it has to be within the risk appetite threshold of the organization. When the cost of mitigation is higher than the potential loss, when the organization has contingency plans or reserve to absorb the impact, this is very important. Whichever risk or whatever risk we are accepting, there must be a contingency plan to say if this happens, this is exactly what we're going to do. The next strategy, risk acceptance can also be used when taking the risk aligns with strategic goals or innovation opportunities. I'll give a clear example. For instance, a startup company accepting the risk of occasional server downtime because investing in expensive backup infrastructure is not feasible at an early stage of the business. And the potential business impact is minor if the server fails, for instance. So under these circumstances or circumstance, an organization can choose to say, well, we accept the risk. So risk acceptance, risk avoidance, there are a little differences. And here we'll provide example to illustrate either. So the first example is Kodak's cautionary tale. Despite investing in the digital camera in the 1970s, Kodak avoided disrupting their film business. This risk avoidance strategy ultimately led to bankruptcy when digital photography became mainstream. You and I are aware of how the transformation in the photography business. So Kodak was wiped off the face of the earth because they avoided taking a strategic risk. The flip side, Amazon. Amazon's strategic risk acceptance. By accepting the risk of entering the cloud computing with AWS in 2006, Amazon transformed a bold experiment into one of the most profitable and industry-defining ventures of the 21st century, reshaping how businesses access and scale technology. So here are two different companies, are two different eras. One took a strategic risk, the other avoided the risk. And they said the rest is history. Risk reduction or risk mitigation. A lot was said about this in our previous video. However, risk reduction involves implementing controls and strategies to limit the severity or likelihood of identified risk, while accepting that the risk cannot be completely eliminated. So your goal will be, you try, put controls in place either to reduce the frequency or to minimize the impact. So there are preventive controls, which are measures designed to prevent risk from from materializing at all. There are redundant controls or redundant systems which provide backup infrastructure to maintain operations during any disruption. Okay, there are also formal procedures. So an organization can put in place a standardized process to reduce human error, which could trigger the risk. So here are some examples. Financial institution. A bank implements multi-factor authentication, transaction monitoring systems, and regular security audits to mitigate the risk of unauthorized access and fraud while maintaining customer service levels. Healthcare. Hospitals implement redundant power systems and backup generators to ensure continuous operation of critical medical equipment during power outages. Sometime during the winter months when there's severe storm, usually power outages are experienced in North America during that time. So, but by investing in generators and backup generators and system, operations continue unhindered during such disruptions. Risk transfer is the final or the last risk response strategy for negative risk. And this involves just shifting the responsibility for managing specific risks to third parties with specialized expertise or resources to handle them more effectively. Insurance policies are some very typical examples. So you transfer financial impact to the insurers, but for as long as you pay your premium monthly or annually as agreed. Outsourcing could also involve transferring operational risks to specialized vendors. Organizations who specializes in manufacturing, for instance, may outsource marketing, accounting, HRO, and other services to experts so that such organization can then focus on their core expert areas where the core production of their product or services. Typical example is cybersecurity. Companies purchase cyber liability insurance to transfer the financial impact of data breaches, including customer notification calls, legal fees, and regulatory fines. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of this class. This is the end of this video. In our next video, we'll talk about the strategy for taking advantage of positive risk. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your attention. I am yours, Dr. Dennis Edego. I'll see you in the next video. Stay tuned.